Most. Hey everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. Well, today we end a wonderful week where we focus on all the professionals from the TrueNorth Health Center. This is day 7. And to introduce today's guest, I have an outfit. You can kind of see by my headband, my earrings, and my shirt. There's really not a lot of places I can wear this outfit where anybody would understand, but this is one of my very favorite people in the plant-based space. He's my mentor and dear friend from whom I learned so much and for whom can take at least half the credit with Dr. Doug Lisle for making me, as we lovingly say, a skinny bitch. Please welcome to the show, Dr. Alan Goldhamer. It is always a pleasure talking to you.
Hey, AJ.
So Dr. Goldhamer, this was a wonderful week. We started the week off with Chef Ramses Bravo, who said to ask you, do you think he's a good chef?
He's a fabulous chef.
Yeah, he really is, isn't he? And he really, to take a regular chef and then to turn him into one that really understands SOS free, I think that was phenomenal what happened there.
Yeah, he's been a real blessing. That was probably the single biggest mistake that we made in operating TrueNorth Health for so many years, so many decades actually, was the delay in hiring a professional chef. And the introduction of Ramses Bravo 15 years ago at TrueNorth Health has made a huge difference in our efficiency of our operation. And I think in making it much easier for people to adopt a whole plant food SOS-free diet. Because even within the constraints of not being able to use meat, fish, fowl, eggs, dairy products, oil, salt, sugar, he's found creative ways of making food interesting, look good, taste good, and stay strictly within our recommendations.
Absolutely. And then the next day was somebody that's new to me, but not new to you. We had Chris Rule with a fabulous story about going from open heart surgery to fasting.
Yeah, Chris has been a tremendous addition, new, young, energetic, well-trained, and does a great job as one of our newest attendings at TrueNorth Health Center. He's also our newest member of our phone coaching services, our telemedicine practice, where people are able to access our attendings remotely. And he has recently joined the team of people willing to do phone and Zoom coaches and has been very successful there as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And then we had Dr. Frank Sabatino, who knew so much about addiction and hormones. I mean, he's almost like, don't take offense, a kinder, gentler version of you.
Yeah, he has a PhD in neuroendocrinology. He was a chiropractor. He's operated a fasting facility for decades. Somebody that I've known since I was a young kid. And I'm so excited that he's been able to join us along with his experience and expertise on our phone coaching services.
Yeah, he's fabulous. And then we had Dr. Varesh, who I actually did a Zoom session with and who's fabulous.
Yeah, she is a naturopathic physician who's been with us for a number of years now and has turned out to be just a fabulous addition to our staff. And really the first woman attending that we've had, which has been really good. We've been looking to expand our staff with women because I do think they bring a different perspective and a different approach that sometimes is greatly appreciated. And she's rather, one of these rare doctors that's like, not only is she not an idiot, but she actually has all kinds of diverse skills. And she's willing both to do it in person as well as remotely. And so, that's been great. Not all doctors are comfortable doing utilizing these new high technology Zoom and all this stuff, but she is, and she's been really fabulous in cultivating support for her practice, both in person and remotely.
So the question is how does one decide which of the professionals to see?
Well, one of the things we offer, which is, I think, useful, is a free phone conversation with me. People can fill out the registration forms, give me a call, and I'll help them figure out who might be the best match for them, the person that they might resonate the best with. And sometimes it's difficult because we have a lot of really good doctors, but a lot of times, depending on the condition that you're dealing with or, the temperament of the individual, we can match somebody up and have a high likelihood that they'll be satisfied with their practitioner.
That's fantastic. Well, we always have so many questions when there's a doctor, especially when it's a doctor like you. We have over 50. So you want to just get started?
Sure.
Okay. So a couple of people wrote in questions to the effect of they have they know people that are very sick, but who don't have the funds to come. They wanted to know if there's any scholarships or a sliding scale, but it's ridiculously cheap. So I don't see how there could be.
Well, but it does add up. When people have to be at the center, sometimes it's not just for days, it may be for weeks, or in some cases for months. And so even though our rates are as affordable as we can manage them, it still becomes a prohibitive problem for some patients. The good news is now that a lot of the work that needs to be done can be done for people on their own at home, implementing the diet and lifestyle changes. And the longer they make those changes, the less time they'd have to be at TrueNorth Health. In fact, it's really been interesting recently because TrueNorth has been so far booked out. Many patients have been working with our doctors remotely before they come in, and some of them, by the time they come in, they're already better. We've had a couple patients that I had enrolled in a trial that we were doing with the Mayo Clinic and treating high blood pressure, but by the time they came in, they had made enough changes. They no longer qualified for the study because their blood pressure was normal. So, health results from healthful living. So not everybody's going to be able to afford to take time off, or they can't be away from their kids, or they can't be away from their job. Although that's gotten a little bit easier since the pandemic, AJ, because many people can now work remotely. And we have very robust Wi-Fi at the center. And so those patients that didn't used to be able to come in because they couldn't get away long enough are now able to participate because of the remote working. But what we do is we try to reduce the rates as low as we can so that as many people as possible can afford to stay at the center long enough to get well. And the reality is we're a 501c3 nonprofit that works on a tiny margin. If we decide not to charge some people, it means by definition, we have to charge other people more because we're operating full. We've got a really robust staff and a significant overhead. As a consequence, we have to generate enough money to stay in business. And so we've set our price point. We can't really do anything about that price point, but what we can do is encourage people to get healthy so they don't have to be with us as long.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, feel free to do these as rapid fire as you like, because there are so many and I want to respect your time. But the first one is from Tim, who has a herniated disc between L4 and 5, number 1, 2, 3 are bulged, and pressing on the nerve, I guess, painful sciatica. And the neurosurgeon wants to perform an operation and wants to know, can chiropractors or water fasting or anything else you do at the TrueNorth Health Center help a person avoid an operation like this?
So with disc herniation, the answer is yes. With disc prolapse, it may be more problematic. So depending on how bad the disc herniation is would determine if they would be responsive to conservative care. But well over 90% of traditional disc herniations will respond to conservative care. A small percentage would need to go into surgery just because you have a dissociation of the nucleus pulposus from the body of the vertebra. And so it might cause pressure that would have to be mechanically reduced. Sometimes we can tell from the MRI reports or from a history and an examination whether or not a person is likely to respond to conservative care. But the first step is see a good chiropractor or an osteopath, get evaluation done, see whether or not you respond to a few weeks of conservative care. If you don't, surgery is always a consideration.
Wow. And this person, by the way, has been eating a clean diet for 20 years, but I guess stuff can still happen even if you're vegan.
You can still get hurt, injured, and damaged even if you're on a healthy diet. It's just the likelihood of recovery tends to go up.
Nice. Thanks. So here is a question from Jesse. Could fasting help heartburn, which has not been helped by a whole food plan exclusive SOFA-free diet?
Yeah, a lot of times with chronic inflammation, we will use fasting. It's also important to make sure that there's not another diagnosis. If a person has gastric ulcer disease or other problems, they may have those symptoms, but may have more significant involvement. And in some cases, that might require medical intervention as well. There's also some mechanical issues that the chiropractors use to reduce diaphragmatic tightness, thoracolumbar joint dysfunction, that oftentimes will also mechanically help with these types of reflux problems. So the combination of fasting and mechanical care often is very successful at resolving these issues.
Great, thank you. Rich says, I recently saw you on the Kick Sugar Summit. You seem to be okay with people eating animal products. Do you really feel that the culprit are the refined carbohydrates like sugar, flour, and alcohol over the animal products?
No, I don't. I suggest people avoid animal products. That's meat, fish, eggs, and dairy products, and avoid salt, oil, and sugar. So I don't recommend people use either of those products. I'm not quite sure what was said that would have misled you into thinking that I was a proponent of people eating animal-based products.
I saw that interview, and I think, I mean, you didn't encourage it, but this isn't a plant-based summit. So I think you said something to the effect of, if people are going to eat some occasionally or something like that.
Well, I think what I probably said, that as far as blood sugar regulation, as bad as animal foods may be in terms of causing all kinds of other problems, they may not be the principal issue of why people are having short-term blood sugar issues, and that sugar itself may be a bigger immediate risk factor. But the long-term, the high animal fat, high animal protein diets contribute to everything from insulin resistance to problems with cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancer, premature death, and disability. And they don't do very much for the planet either, in terms of the consequences of our animal husbandry. Not to mention the fact that now we're dealing with viruses and other problems, which are in large part due because of how we raise animals and how we get exposed to these viruses.
Well, in the vegan world, they avoid all animal products, yet still a lot of vegans have health problems. They're overweight. So do you think that the refined carbohydrates are equally as destructive as the animal products?
Well, it depends on what you're talking about. The animal products are worse for some things, and sugar, oil, and salt are worse for other things. And the problem is, you can't just be a vegan, because that just means no animal products, unless you also get rid of the SOS. And if you get rid of the SOS, I agree, in terms of weight and a lot of these issues, that may be the dominant factor for a lot of people, getting rid of the salt, the oil, and the sugar.
Great. Thank you. All right. So we'll just go as fast as we can with these questions. Melanie said, please ask Dr. Goldhamer to explain how the vagus nerve affects the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. Are there any movements or stretches to keep it functioning well?
Well, the vagus nerve is, it be profoundly influenced in the gastrointestinal tract. This whole autonomic nervous system is the automatic nervous system. It's the thing that controls the things you don't have to think about. For example, if you went out running and your heart didn't speed up to pump more blood, you'd eventually die. People don't die from that because the heart automatically speeds up. And that automatic system is controlled by the automatic or autonomic nervous system. The two parts are the sympathetic and parasympathetic, and they kind of balance each other out. So for example, if your sympathetic nervous tone is set too high, that's called hypersympathectonia, you might have constipation, because the nervous system controls, amongst other things, the movement of peristalsis in your gut. If the parasympathetic nervous system is set too high, you might have diarrhea. So when people are having diarrhea, they have hyperparasympathectonia. They have constipation, they often have hypersympathectonia. Getting that nervous system balanced is an important issue. And we've invented hundreds of healing systems to do that. For example, chiropractic manipulation, osteopathic manipulation, massage, biofeedback, yoga, meditation, homeopathy, acupuncture, all these different systems. How do you think they affect people's pain? It's because they affect the autonomic nervous system largely. So although some systems may work better than others, the most powerful way of rebalancing the autonomic nervous system is fasting. Because fasting works like taking a hard drive in a computer that's been corrupted and rebooting it. You don't know why, but now it starts working again. And the same thing often happens after fasting. People fast, they go back to healthy eating, and now all these hypersympathectonia problems start resolving. So I don't know if that has anything to do with the question, but I like that answer.
Great, thank you. Leah says, is the testing they do for food allergies reliable? I've eaten a starch-based diet for 10 years, but still suffer from sniffles when eating and joint stiffness and pain. I tried an elimination diet, but haven't been successful in sticking with it long enough to pinpoint anything.
Okay, so the testing, the RAS testing, the ALCAT testing, although may have some clinical utility, it's not as reliable as people would like. And it also changes dramatically. For example, if you do ALCAT testing before and after fasting, you'll get completely different results. A lot of times it'll show positives to things people are eating a lot of, whether they're necessarily sensitive to it or not. So you have to take it all with a grain of kelp, because it's not a black and white situation. But sometimes it might point to a food that you can experiment with in a rotational diet and determine whether or not you actually have sensitivity. What I like to do is water-only fasting, get rid of all the symptoms, and then rotate food back in and see if we can identify the classes of food that people may be sensitive to.
Great, thank you. Carissa says, are your fasting clients usually able to maintain their fasting weight loss if they follow a plant-exclusive diet afterwards?
Well, what we know now, in part because of studies we've done recently using a DEXA scanner, is that body composition changes in fasting are very predictable. You lose fat, water, glycogen, protein, during fasting. And after fasting, you regain water, glycogen, protein, and fiber, but not fat. If you're eating a whole plant food SOS-free diet, what will happen is you'll continue to lose excess fat, but you'll regain your muscle, protein, fiber, and water. And we've been able to actually prove that in a study that'll be coming out later this month. In fact, as all of our studies, if you go to our website, fasting.org, you can find all of the studies that we've published and their results.
Thank you. All right, we have a question from Linda. A little over a year ago, my bone density test showed a 20% bone loss from the year before. I was put on Prolia, a shot every 6 months, and just had my 3rd shot. They don't want to do another until I have 4 shots, 2 years. I wondered what you think of Prolia and if you have had any bad outcomes from it. I don't like medicines. I'm not overweight. I'm on a plant-based SOS-free diet, exercising 45 to 60 minutes, 7 days a week, including weights. I'm 67 years old. Thank you for any information.
Okay, so there's a number of things that cause osteoporosis. We know that people on high animal protein diets, the high sulfur amino acids, tend to leach calcium. People that are on high phosphoric acid, the soda pop and the coffee and all this stuff, tends to also create an unfavorable environment. People that are not on a healthy diet, but on a high sugar diet, rather than a high mineral content diet with lots of vegetables, don't do as well. Weight-bearing exercise, as the patient identified, very important. Vitamin D levels, very important. And many people are, in fact, vitamin D deficient. And D is important to keep the calcium in the matrix of the bone. So always want to check 25-dehydroxyvitamin D levels and make sure that's normal and get enough sun exposure or, if necessary, supplementation to correct that. And then there's also a hormone balance. And a lot of the hormones that are necessary to maintain normal bone integrity are influenced by the bacteria that live in the gut. So it turns out that the diet that you eat can be very important. Taking, for example, calcium supplements is not going to solve the problem, but eating a health promoting diet that favors a normal, diverse microbiome may, in fact, be very important. So first of all, I would do all of those things. Many people jump right to the medications and the promise of the pills and the potions. The problem with these medications is that although they may make the bone denser, they may not actually reduce your risk of fracture. And that's actually what people are concerned about. They don't want hip fractures and bone fractures. And so in some of the studies, even though the bones get denser on radiography, they don't necessarily, or they're not necessarily more resilient to fracture. So I'm not a big fan of the pills, but what I would say is if you're eating a healthy diet and doing exercise and still having progressive osteoporosis, I would do a phone consultation with somebody like Dr. Chilla Vares or Dr. Peter Sultana, who are very good at helping people kind of get into the weeds and fine tune, not just good diet, but all of the lifestyle issues and the nutritional medicine issues that might be relevant to try to reverse the problem.
Thank you. Susan says, I eat whole food plant-based and I'm too thin by my own standards and underweight per BMI calculations. Can a stay at TrueNorth get me on track for gaining weight? And are you open over the holidays like Thanksgiving and Christmas?
We're always open over all the days. Gaining weight is a very important issue. In fact, it's much harder in some cases to regain weight than it is to lose weight. Losing weight is pretty predictable. In terms of gaining weight, we have to find out why you're not absorbing. Either are you eating enough caloric density or are you absorbing enough caloric density? Sometimes the same diet, but more heavily processed. We might do, for example, some blended soups and some smoothies where food is mechanically processed so that it's easier to absorb and we can get a little bit more in is enough to solve the weight issue. Other times there's digestive issue problems so we have to reboot that gut microbiome. And sometimes, interestingly enough, even in very thin people, a very short fast can sometimes be helpful in kind of recalibrating that microbiome. So even though it doesn't seem intuitively obvious, we do sometimes very short bits of fasting to try to help get people's digestive system improved. Again, these can be much more tricky, and there may need to be a little bit of careful analysis of exactly what you're putting in your mouth, and then try to figure out how to increase caloric density enough that you can regain weight.
Right. But most people seem to have the opposite problem, don't they?
Yeah, I think, there's more people, 2/3 of people are overweight or obese. So, clearly the vast majority of people are caught in the pleasure trap.
The pleasure trap. And I hear that you came up with that exceptional title.
Yeah, when we were going to do this book development, I did come up with the idea of the pleasure trap. And then in order to allow Dr. Lau to feel like he participated, I let him write the book. So I felt like that was a pretty fair kind of thing to do.
That is hilarious. Thank you. Nina says, is there a diet you recommend to relieve symptoms of ITP, especially chronic fatigue, and to increase the platelet count?
Yeah, again, this is an interesting area with both low and high platelet counts. And again, sometimes we can use fasting to reboot the system. It depends on really what it is that's causing the problem. There's so many different conditions that can contribute to those particular laboratory findings. But we certainly do have some concern when platelet counts are very, very low. Then a person isn't able to clot. And so you're concerned about bleeding. When they're very, very high, of course, you're concerned about, kind of the opposite, getting clots and PEs and other kinds of things. So, either way, we want platelets in a normal range. And when it's appropriate, we'll use fasting. If it's not, then we have to try to figure out what it is that's causing the imbalance to begin with.
Thank you. I want to know if wax sprayed on organic produce is really as safe as the claims. And are there places that sell organic produce that is not sprayed with wax?
Well, as far as I'm not aware of any particular health issues with the wax that they use, to try to keep moisture in the fruit. But I mean, organically grown fruits and vegetables normally is usually unwaxed and unsprayed. I mean, that's certainly the preference. Fortunately, worst case scenario, you can peel that, and wax doesn't penetrate, so that unlike pesticides that can get into the matrix of the fruit, you should be able to peel that if you had to. But I think it would be better to, preferably buy local organic produce that hadn't been sprayed. They're spraying it so that they can have it extend its shelf life, and of course, the longer fresh fruits and vegetables sit around, the lower their nutritional integrity is going to be.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Let's see. Some of these are really long. Those people, I think, need to get consults. So I'll see if I have time for them. But Wendy says, if I put fruit or vegetables in a blender and blend it till creamy, think smoothie, is the fiber destroyed?
The fiber is not destroyed, but it is altered. And so I don't have a problem with smoothies for people that are trying to increase caloric density because they're trying to put some weight on and stuff, or you're feeding kids and trying to get as much food into them as you can. But even if you're using blended foods, assuming your colon can tolerate fiber, you would probably want to include some whole vegetables that you're chewing up so that you get, and progressively more as time goes on if you're having trouble with digestion, so that you can get back to eating whole plant food diet, maintain normal bowel function and the rest. It's not that it's destroyed, but the more you process food, the more you break that down, the higher the caloric density and the more potential challenges there's going to be.
Great, thank you. Here's a question from Valerie. Is it possible to stay at True North without fasting and get an appointment with one of the doctors?
Absolutely. A significant percentage of our patients never skip a meal. So they're eating, they're coming in for evaluations and treatment, and or they, they're in the area and they want to stay at a place they can get healthy meals and, all that kind of stuff. So you do not need to fast. Not everybody's a good fasting candidate. Many of our patients are coming for follow-up because it's a place you can go, relax, eat well, be healthy, and not have to put up with all the challenges there are, being away from home in some other place.
Okay. Here's a question from Caroline, because you're one of the few doctors in the plant-based space that really insist on salt-free. And she says, the historical instance recounted in Nagasaki, 1945, by the author, a Japanese medical doctor who ordered cooks at the St. Francis Hospital to make miso soup vegetables with salt and no sugar to his patients after the atomic bomb blast, with the result being no radiation poisoning. How does that square with the efficacy of the no salt regime that you advocate?
Well, it wouldn't be salt. I imagine it would be iodine that they're probably thinking about, trying to minimize exposure. You don't need to eat salt to get iodine. They do iodize salt. They add it to salt, but you don't need to have your to get iodine that way. You can take kelp, you can take a supplement if you're concerned about taking iodine. And everybody else that's arguing that salt's a good thing and you should eat whatever you want is wrong. And in this particular instance, I believe that I'm correct. And I think that the evidence is now becoming more apparent that reducing sodium intake actually is highly beneficial. not the least of which is true with obesity. And people have argued a long time, oh, well, salt doesn't have anything to do with fat because there's no calories in it. But they're not understanding that fast stimulates something called passive overeating, and that it can fool the satiety mechanisms in the brain. So it leads people to eating more, even of relatively healthy foods than they would otherwise, before their natural mechanisms in the brain turn it off. And so I think that, in fact, salt, oil, and sugar are all highly processed food byproducts that need to be avoided from the diet if you want to be lean and mean and healthy and happy. And the fact that some people have eliminated oil and sugar is great, but now eventually they're going to have to come around and realize that it's an SOS-free diet, not an OS or SO diet. It's an SOS-free diet that actually results in the best outcomes.
Great. Thank you. This is a question from Stephanie that I've always wondered about you as well. Many of us watching are fans of yours and have seen you on many different forums. You get asked repetitive questions so often and are always generous and happy to answer. Is there a question that you feel does not get asked enough? Is there a subject in health and wellness arena that doesn't get the attention it should have? I've never heard that question, and I really like it.
Well, I think it's an excellent question. I'm very fortunate, though, that the people that are tending to interview me are usually very thoughtful, and they do a really good job of asking questions that are relevant to the listener. So I think the question that is the important issue is that the questions be coming from the people that are listening to the broadcast, because it's their questions that are important. It doesn't matter what I think. It matters what their questions are, and trying to provide meaningful content that satisfies them, and that when they implement it, it works. A lot of people give a lot of advice, and some of that advice is good and some of it's really awful. But the proof is in the result. And, we're fortunate at TrueNorth because we get a chance to live with our patients, and we can see every day the impact of applying our recommendations. And I've been doing this a long time now, almost 40 years. And so I'm seeing people now that we've been tracking for decades, and we see what happens when people do the right thing. You, AJ, are not an exception. I've watched you transform yourself. And, again, when we met, you were doing things right. You just had a little fine tuning that needed to be done. And you did that fine tuning, and, we see the result, and that's pretty consistent. So it doesn't mean people are doing everything wrong. It's just sometimes if you take, you tighten the screws a little bit more, you can get that additional desirable result. And, including whole plant food, SOS-free diet, exercise, sleep, and also learning to manage stress properly. All this constant stress hormones that people are under all the time probably is not a good thing for us. And so learning to manage stress may be an important issue as well as what you put in your mouth.
Well, I always tell people if they want to lose weight or get healthy, there's only 5 words they need to know. Do everything Dr. Goldhamer says. But, you have some detractors. I mean, there are people that I don't want to say they bash you personally, but what they'll do is they'll bash the SOS saying, well, you can't, we have people, it's not realistic. I have people in their 20s and you can't tell them to not have a cup of coffee or some alcohol or salt. And they think. Or
a few cigarettes or a little cocaine or a little promiscuous sexual activity or, some self-indulgent short-term pleasure seeking behavior. Of course, I hear that all the time. And that's fine. And I have no problem with that. I understand. Yes, it's very difficult. It's not for everybody. I'm not trying to speak to everybody. I'm trying to speak to the people that are serious about trying to maximize their health and happiness and overcome the chronic illnesses that haven't worked with the pill, potion, powder treatment type of an approach.
Great. This might be perfect for one of the health coaching consults. It's from Armando. And he was recently diagnosed with a hypothyroid condition, trying to get him to go on medication, which he doesn't want to do. He's not showing any symptoms, feels perfectly fine. Lab results were 6.85. I don't know what that milligrams per liter or something like that. Do you think he should start taking levothyroxine just based on bad numbers? Would a consultation with you and or water fasting at your center help with the condition? He's been whole food plant-based for 8 years.
TSH is mildly elevated. They're telling me he's hypothyroidism. So the good news is that sometimes you can reboot that system and then thyroid levels will normalize. And we use fasting, diet, et cetera, to deal with that. If it works, then we're done. The problem is not everybody will it work for. And in those patients, thyroid replacement therapy may be a necessary consideration. Now, we know that the HLA-DQ gene that's associated with hypothyroidism is the same gene that's been associated with gluten sensitivity. And the theory currently is that some people are sensitive to gluten, the proteins found in wheat, rye, and barley. And if they eat it, 1% of the population has developed celiac disease, where the intestinal tract is attacked by your immune system. It's very serious. And the answer is don't eat gluten. Well, it turns out there are some people, they don't get celiac disease, but they get what's called Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So the thyroid gland is attacked by your own immune system, and the hypothyroidism develops. And it may be that eating gluten in those people sensitizes the immune system and reacts not just as celiac in 1% of the population, but in Hashimoto's in another. And there's other symptoms that people get when they're wheat sensitive. Interesting enough, AG, not everybody's sensitive to gluten, but enough are that we've just eliminated gluten as a routine ingredient in our cookbooks. So our Health Corner cookbook, the Bravo Express cookbooks, AJ's cookbook, and Kathy's Straight Up Cooking, the 5 vegan SOS-free cookbooks that we recommend, all of them are free of or dramatically limit the amount of gluten and wheat or other products in them. And it turns out you really don't have to have gluten in order to have interesting food. And it's perfectly, you're perfectly capable of eliminating those things and not necessarily having to give up a variety of interesting foods.
I've never used it in any of my books. Elaine says, is granulated or powdered garlic and granulated or powdered onion as healthy as the raw version?
Well, I don't think anything's ever usually as healthy processed as it is fresh. The question is, can you use it without compromising your health? And I think the answer is probably yes, assuming it's just dried garlic and not have all kinds of other stuff added to it. But, when you can do something fresh, there's, it not just tastes better, but it's probably better for us as well.
All right. Whenever we have a doctor on, I insist that people send the questions in advance because it's just not fair otherwise. But I have to see one I'm seeing here because of something you said, which is, isn't the bar being set too high with your program? And once you take out the flour, there's not much left. Aren't we allowed the occasional odd treat?
Yeah, absolutely. It's set too high. It's set way, way too high for anybody except those people that are serious about getting and staying healthy or trying to overcome chronic disease. For the other people, this wouldn't be probably a good approach. But for those that are serious about trying to get and stay healthy and that don't want to spend the last 20 years of their life unable to talk or move, lying in some nursing home bed waiting for people to change their diaper, but rather stay fully functional and healthy, I think the best chance of helping that happen would be to adopt a whole plant food SOS-free diet, engage in regular exercise, and get enough sleep. And when appropriate, use intermittent fasting every day and occasionally long-term fasting when it's appropriate. So too much for a lot of people, no question. Just exactly what's needed for some people, absolutely. And so we've never pretended that this was an approach that would be amenable, for everybody or popular or easy. It's not. But for the people that need it or want it, it's the best that we've come up with so far. Now, if we got a better suggestion on how to make it more effective, I'm all ears.
Right. Thank you. Well, that nasty ego trap that Dr. Lyle talks about messes it up for a lot of people, doesn't it?
It can.
Yep. Angela says, is it appropriate for healthy, whole food, plant exclusive athletic women over 60 to intermittent fast? And if so, for how many hours?
Well, I think everybody should fast every day. And depending on what your goals are, that period of fasting should range from 12 to 16 hours. So if you're trying to lose weight, a 16-hour fast, 8-hour feeding window works well for many people, not eating 3 to 4 hours before you go to sleep preferentially. And then maybe getting a little exercise in the morning before you have breakfast. The predominant amount of calories that are burned are going to be derived from fat. Now, if you're trying to gain weight, maybe that's not the very best strategy. It might be a 12-hour, feeding window might be more appropriate. Or if you have a person with very high caloric needs, so, they're athletes and they're running around and burning a lot of calories, they may need a wider window of feeding because this low caloric density, high nutrition density food, you have to eat a lot, just to get enough to sustain yourself. So I don't think it's an absolute fixed amount of hours for every person. You have to match the person, but everybody should fast every day for a period of probably 12 to 16 hours.
Thank you. Okay, this is for Jimmy. And we get this question a lot, and I think it's important that you stress the efficacy of this. Unsupervised water fasting at home, ? Is it the same? Is it safe? And what is the maximum length of days one should do?
Yeah, so I do recommend people fast at home on their own without supervision for 12 to 16 hours every day. I don't think that is going to present a problem, regardless of patients' routines for most people. When we do longer term fasting, whether it's 2 days or 2 weeks or 2 months, what we need is first history exam and laboratory baseline. So there's history and exam to determine if a person's an appropriate candidate for fasting. Not everybody's an appropriate candidate, even for 2 days. There are people that 2 days of fasting could be seriously compromising, depending on their medication profile and their history. And certainly when people are doing long-term water-only fasting, so there's a history, there's exam, and then there's monitoring that needs to be done. And so unfortunately, the complication with long-term fasting is it really is best done in an environment of rest under direct medical supervision. Is it possible for people to fast at home safely? Yes. We have one doctor, Justin Wise, who does a lot of remote phone support, but he does it in conjunction with the patient's local doctor. So the local doctor does the history exam and lab, and he's able to provide coaching services to the doctor and to the patient so that they can get through the process safely. The problem is it's really a lot more difficult to make that successful than it is when you're in a facility that's designed to provide that support. Many doctors are not interested in fasting, or if they are, they're not interested in providing 24/7 support. Many people are not in a restful environment where they can get the kind of help that they need. And it also not just the fasting. The nice thing in these facilities is we all offer intense education. And so then when people are done with their fast, they've also gone through an intense educational process so that when they go home, hopefully they can stick to a healthy program and make us look good.
Thank you. Glenn wants to know, can you explain the nature of endotoxins? Are they found only mainly in animal products? They cannot be destroyed by cooking. Is that correct? And what is the health effect of endotoxin consumption?
Yeah, I don't think I'd be comfortable talking about endotoxins in detail because I really haven't done the research to be able to tell you, what the denaturation points or saturation points are, and what the significance is. So I think I'd like to skip that question for now. What I can do, AJ, though, is I could do some research, and next time I can come in and babble on about endotoxins probably in detail.
Great, thank you. I think there's a doctor that deals with that a lot. Her name is Dr. Vivian Chen, and I've had her on the show. Glenn, if you'd like to check out one of the videos, and she has a large Instagram following. Let's see, this is from Debbie. Dr. Goldhamer, what foods to eat or avoid to combat severe depression?
Well, the foods that you want to avoid are the foods that disrupt the gut microbiome. So that would be meat, fish, fowl, eggs, dairy products, oil, salt, and sugar. And probably gluten. The foods that you want to eat would be the ones that favor a normal gut microbiome, because it's the gut actually that's responsible for much of the neurotransmitter production, et cetera. So the foods that you'd eat would be fresh fruits and vegetables, non-glutinous grains, nuts and seeds, et cetera. But I don't think that diet is the only variable to be taken with depression. I think that depression often is a result of, cognitive changes that occur based on the experience people are having in the world and in their life. And so you want to look at things like, are people sleeping enough? Sleep deprivation can make you more vulnerable to depression. Are people exercising appropriately? Because people that exercise maintain higher brain serotonin levels and are probably less vulnerable to anxiety and depression. Are people's lives working properly? Are people being exposed excessively to what I call energy vampires? People that do what they do best and make other people as miserable as they are, so by comparison, they don't have to feel so bad. And so learning to get those kind of evil forces out of your life, or at least minimize them, can help reduce those causes. And then engaging in behaviors, as Dr. Lyle talks about, where you can build esteem based on your success and implementing what you believe to be true, can be an important issue in changing your mood states. So I think we got to be careful that it's not just diet that's going to be involved in resolving depression and getting people healthier and happier.
Great, thank you. This is from Jolene. Salt always seems to be the big one with you because you're the one that's insistent upon it. I just finished reading the book, The Salt Fix by Dr. James Nicolantio, and I'm wanting your take on it. I listened to the podcast with Dr. Mark Hyman about how increased salt intake can help with sugar addiction. What are your thoughts?
I really haven't seen any evidence to suggest that what I'm going to take salt that's going to help reduce my sugar cravings. I mean, it's like, what if I drink to eat sugar, then it helps me with my alcoholism. I mean, the fact is when people quit drinking, they do crave sugar more. That doesn't mean eating sugar is keeping them from drinking. And so I think you have to be careful about errors of, making mistaken associations. And eating more salt, as far as I understand, is certainly not a treatment for sugar addiction.
Great, thank you. This is from, who's this
To
from?
me, that would be like saying, well, if I take cocaine and then that helps me stop drinking, then that's a cure for alcoholism. It's just not real.
Right. Well, don't you feel like all these years you've been doing it, that's the hardest thing for people, or that's where they fight you the most on? Because I don't think a lot of people fight the plant-based experts on oil, and most people know that sugar isn't healthy.
Well,
but
they used to fight us on everything, AJ. The oil they used to fight on refined carbohydrates even. At one point, that was a challenge. Now what's happened is so many other people have joined us in arguing against oil and arguing against sugar. And it's just a question of time, and they'll join us in arguing against salt too. In fact, there's recently an article that came out in one of the big journals that talked about, we've got to readdress what we consider, acceptable levels of sodium. And they haven't gone far enough, but people come around and give it another few years, and the salt will be on the same. They'll realize that we were correct about that all along.
Were you the first, you think, in the plant-based space?
No, I don't think so. I think my mentor John McDougall, although he wasn't as aggressive with salt, and still to this day is mistaken in my opinion, in his flexibility with the use of sodium. But his flexibility isn't based on the fact that salt's a great thing that you have to have. It's based on the fact that he's trying to make the diet more palatable under the illusion that if you do that, we'll get more people eating vegetarian, and you have to get more people eating vegetarian in order to save the planet. And so I don't think he would argue that, having lower sodium intake is a beneficial thing for an individual, but he's advocating our approach to the diet is so exclusionary that it'll never catch on in a big way, and therefore the planet will be destroyed because people continue to eat too much meat. And so that even if we have to compromise people's health by being more flexible in the sodium, at least it'll save the planet. I'm not disagreeing with him. I'm glad that he's out there helping save the planet. That's not my focus. My focus is helping my patients either recover health or maintain health. So I don't feel obligated to have to compromise my advice because of the quote, the bigger picture. I understand there's a bigger picture, and that's great that other people are taking that on. I'm just not focused on that.
Thank you. Okay, so this is from Peter. Is it okay to use monk fruit instead of dates as a sweetener, since it has 0 calories and 0 effect on the glycemic index? I do not have a sweet addiction. I've lost 25 pounds since starting whole food plant-based diet in July with ease.
Well, my first question is, why are we using either? What are we trying to sweeten? What is it? What whole natural food are we having to sweeten that needs a sweetener to make it acceptable? And if you want to have a date, or you want to have some, I don't know much about monk fruit, so I'm not sure, how it's used or what the benefit of it is. But I don't have a problem if somebody wants to eat a dried fruit like a date, and they don't eat too much and take it with a bunch of greens, whatever. But my concern is when you're making things you have to sweeten, it's usually some highly processed food that you're basically changing the nature of in order to make it highly stimulating and highly appealing. That's essentially what desserts are. You've eaten a meal and you're full. In order to get somebody to eat even more than they should, you have to make hyper normal stimulation. And that's where the use of these hyper concentrated foods like dates and other things are used. It doesn't mean the food is necessarily a bad food, but it's hyper stimulating because it's hyper concentrated in calories. And unless your goal is to try to gain weight, I'm not sure that that's really the best strategy.
Great. Thank you. I just want to thank Angela for the super chat donation. And let's see, here's a question from, looks like Peter. Big fan of your work, 34-year-old male living with chronic pain since 19, vegan nearly 5 years. Huge change in his pain since going vegan. And I went SOS free a few months ago, found your book really helpful. Are there any studies, or have you had any experience people with fibromyalgia or chronic pain getting better with fasting?
Yeah, chronic pain is a huge issue, and fibromyalgia is a common diagnosis, both of which often respond to the combination of approaches that we use, which is fasting, a whole plant food diet, appropriate exercise or rehabilitation, and sometimes therapy as well. We use physical therapy and chiropractic manipulation, et cetera. These can be very helpful in dealing with mechanical components. Fasting is helpful with dealing with the inflammatory component, getting the microbiome right. And then diet and lifestyle is necessary, and improved posture, body use, all these things play together. But our results are good. And a lot of patients with chronic pain syndromes oftentimes do get dramatic improvement. In fact, we're often able to get people off their medications. And, one of the problems with pain medications is at first you get pain, because of the withdrawal effect. And so getting through that can be important. Fasting can be an important part of that.
Great. Thank you. All right. This is kind of long. So, sorry. This is from Bobby. Observing, she's 73, walks 45 minutes daily, and participates in senior water aerobics. She's gotten off 4 of her 5 meds. Her hydroxychloroquine is the last one. She's whole food plant-based 2 years. And the medicines were for RA, but she's observing a tremor that's worsening over the last year on the right side of her, in her hand and lower arm. So anything that your facility could do for that?
So first of all, we want to find out, with autoimmune diseases, these medications that are used are very powerful. So it is important to wean off the medications. It's important to get the gut right to control the symptoms of autoimmune disease. We often use fasting to kind of, again, reboot the system, and that can be very helpful. The tremor, we need to diagnose, what is this, a essential tremor, or is this a Parkinson's onset or something of that nature? And then depending on what it is would determine what what you might want to do or not do in terms of nutritional medicine support in that condition. So unfortunately, a little bit more complicated than we would be able to tell from her letter. So we need to do more of a detailed assessment. And, in a person like this, we have doctors like Dr. Sultana, Dr. Bress, which are both skilled at assessing and treating Parkinson's disease related tremors and other problems. So they would be really good people to consult with, because they can give you both the medical view as well as the alternative view, and hopefully come up with suggestions and solutions that will actually work.
Thank you. Question, is there any efficacy in asking your doctor for labs that show your omega-3s or your omegas in general, or zinc?
Yeah, zinc is a test that can be done that is reliable. Omega-3, the problem is there is testing that you can do. The testing itself is reliable. It's just that interpreting the results is a little bit of a challenge, because it's not exactly clear what normals or what ideals necessarily are. So I think in the case of frank deficiency, yeah, it might be useful. And then what would we do? Well, we would say, why don't we start including things like flax seeds or walnuts or green vegetables, or if necessary, supplementation of vegan-based docosahexaoxalic acid. But it's not like black and white. It's not like there's this means, it is too much, too little. There's still a lot of debate about what normal actually means there.
Yeah. I probably should have asked you this at the beginning, but there could be people watching, because we have several hundred, probably over 500 people watching. What is a water fast?
So water fast is the complete abstinence of all substances except water only in an environment of rest. And we recommend it be done under direct medical supervision. So patients go through history exam and lab. They come in, they're in a controlled setting at the TrueNorth Health Center or one of the other facilities like Nathan's facility in Orange County, Gracie Ewan's in Ohio. Dr. Sabatino also runs some programs occasionally in Florida. And so they're seen twice a day at the TrueNorth Health Center by staff doctors. They're monitored carefully. As I said, we try to do intense brainwashing or education, we're supposed to call it. And then they go eat a whole plant food SOS-free diet afterwards. If they need to see any of our doctors are all available to provide whatever supportive care might be appropriate. And it's pretty cool because, we see people with high blood pressure, diabetes, autoimmune diseases, certain types of cancer that get well. And if you want to look at the results of our outcome, you can go to fasting.org and look at the studies. We've published a number of papers now in peer-reviewed journals, more coming out every year, showing just how good the body is at healing itself if you get out of the way.
That's incredible. Thank you. Okay, this is from Beatrice. It's about blood pressure. She monitors her blood pressure on a regular basis and was told to take it at 10 minutes after rest. She noticed if she takes it without resting, it's between 130 and 140. But if she rests for 10 minutes, it goes down 10 points between 120 and 130. The other numbers stay consistent. Since she doesn't spend most of her waking hours in the resting position, shouldn't she be worried about the numbers that she gets?
Well, all those numbers are too high, resting or active. But the way we count, all the numbers are calibrated based on a person resting. So when you're more active, of course, your blood pressure is going to be higher. When you're exercising, it's going to be quite high. So the numbers that we're using to correlate are resting blood pressure. So people are calm and resting. And those numbers we're wanting to see as close to 90/60 as possible. Normal is considered below 120 and below 180. Anything over that, there's going to be proportionally increased risk. And so I would say she does have elevated blood pressure, which means that she's either overweight or she's eating too much salt or she's not getting enough exercise or there's too much stress. And so all of those need to be solved. And when they're solved, likely her blood pressure will normalize. If it doesn't normalize quickly enough, do a fast. A person like that fasting for a couple of weeks, assuming there's no contraindications, will have pressure probably 100/60, and they can then sustain it with a healthy diet.
Right. She said her blood pressure was much higher when she had coffee and salt. That's the other thing. See, a lot of the plant-based doctors are recommending coffee. They're saying you need 5 cups a day. I think it was Dr.
Well, that's a mistake. And, plant-based, just because a doctor's plant-based doesn't mean he's necessarily correct about everything. And, people still make mistakes, and that's okay. And they're making a mistake when they recommend coffee as a health promoter.
They say it helps with heart disease, and it helps with weight loss, and it helps prevent dementia. That's what they're all saying now. Drink 5
So, and unfortunately, the studies that they're using to try to support that, I think, are inaccurate. And so, they say, that it's very difficult, especially with limited information, to draw conclusions about cause and effect. And so I think that this is going to turn out ultimately, as more data becomes available, that the harm that's done by a highly addictive nervous system stimuli like caffeine that's found in coffee outweighs whatever micro benefits there may be, because it's still a plant-based product.
Great. Okay. Here's some questions from Heidi. She asked like 10, so I think she needs a consult, but I will ask 2 of them that I think are more that would help more people, because the topics are more for everyone than just necessarily her personal health history. And I think this is a good one. It's about the Cologuard test. Are there a lot of false negatives and false positives with the Cologuard home use kit or the fecal occult blood test home kit? And would you recommend either of these, especially if he doesn't have any issues? So
there are false positives and false negatives. That refers to sensitivity and specificity. So a test that's very sensitive has a low false negative. A test that has high specificity has a low false positive. A low false negative, you don't want to have a test that has high false negative, because that would mean that the test says you're okay, but you're not. So give you false sense of security. You don't want to have a test with low false, you do want to have a test with low false positive, because a false positive would say you have a problem and you don't. And so you might get unnecessary treatment. That's the case with mammograms. They have problems with a high amount of false positives. And so what happens is a lot of people are then ultimately end up being treated detrimentally for conditions that don't exist, which is one of the reasons why mammograms typically don't save lives. Dr. Greger recently came out with a nice overview on mammograms, and he raised the issue that mammography creates as many problems as it solves, and as a consequence, the net balance just isn't there, at least for many people. And the same thing's true with colon cancer. We know that there are treatments, including the removal of polyps, that have been associated with a net increase in life saving. And so they want to test for bleeding so that this could be treated early. Now, obviously, the most important thing is let's get on a healthy diet that's not consistent with promoting colon cancer. But doing testing, I think, does make some sense, because it's non-invasive. You can take a stool sample. If there's blood there, you have to figure out why there's blood there. You don't necessarily have to do invasive medical treatments, but you do want to have something that gets resolved. If you do have to have polyps removed, that's a relatively low invasive procedure. It has been associated with some potential benefits. So I don't think we could rule that out. But more importantly, if it motivates people to make the diet and lifestyle change necessary to eliminate the bleeding, that would be a good thing. Now, as far as the specific sensitivity and specificity of Cologuard or other testing, you can look at the label and they'll give you sensitivity specificity ratings. And I don't know, all of them are, have problems with false positives and false negatives. How specific, I'm not sure. But what you can do is, if you have a test that's positive, you can certainly retest. Multiple tests improve accuracy. False negative is more of a problem because you think there's not a problem, but there may be.
Great, thanks. Are radio wave frequencies and charcoal lasers and pulsed light for softening facial wrinkles dangerous or okay to get? And how about cool sculpting, freezing the fat, sculpture, laser fat heating? Is it dangerous to get that last inch of fat around my waist that doesn't seem to want to go away? Have you heard about the supermodel Linda Evangelista who had that? Yeah.
Some terrible side effects and problems. Any of these surgical procedures, or I don't know if you call it surgical, but these invasive procedures have potential problems. More importantly, the big danger is you're not forced to actually do the diet and lifestyle changes that you need to do. And just getting rid of the fat through that method isn't the same thing as getting rid of the fat by improving your diet and lifestyle, doing exercise, and taking care of business. So I think that, these cosmetic surgical procedures would be last resort considerations in exceptional circumstances for people that have problems, that wouldn't respond to diet and lifestyle change. I don't get to see those people really. Most people I see, they would in fact respond. They would lose their fat if they're willing to do what it takes to actually get healthy. Mostly it's people looking for short circuits, do anything other than, give up the salt or give up the sugar or give up the fat.
I know this particular individual and she's pretty compliant.
Mm-hmm. Well, like I said, I'd like to see what will happen. And maybe what we need to do is some preferential fasting to actually mobilize that visceral fat that she needs to get rid of. And then, rebuild that way. So not a big fan of, invasive procedures.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. If somebody does chronometer and shows that they're low in selenium, do they need to supplement?
Well, I think what you might consider doing, first of all, would be to modify the diet so that you're no longer low in selenium. However, you want to be really careful because the chronometer measures, the theoretical quantitative material that's in the food. But remember, the food nutrients can be profoundly different. For example, if you take selenium in the food format, it may be very different than supplemental format. For those interested in this, you might want to read Dr. Campbell's book, Whole. Talks a lot about how the same quantity of a nutrient in a whole food can have many times the potentiating effect as, say, a supplemental nutrition. So just because, if your chronometer says your diet's low in selenium, then what you would do is add a few more foods that are richer in selenium and try to get that balanced out. That will likely be a pretty simple solution.
Great, thanks. Here is a fun question from Roween. Actually, yes, here it is. How did you meet Dr. Lyle? How long have you known Dr. Lyle? And how did you guys come to collaborate on the Pleasure Trap?
So I met Dr. Lyle in the summer school before fourth grade. We were in this MGM program. And so we ended up going, they selected the 30 kids in the district that had the highest IQs, and they put them in a class together. And so we met going to that MGM class. And I recognized something in him almost immediately, like literally the first day or two. I realized that he was a lot smarter than the other kids, and he was also a lot smarter than the teachers. And so I thought he would be a really good person to collaborate with because he clearly had a lot going for him. And we started playing basketball. He was a very good basketball player. And so we grew up together from all the way through elementary, junior high school, in high school. Then we worked together. And then he went off to do his PhD in psychology, and I went to chiropractic college. And then we came back together to do TrueNorth Health. And then he moved in with us for a couple of years so that we could make him write. And he wrote The Pleasure Trap over a period of about 2 years. And every night we worked on the book in what we called the green chairs. Those were because we would yell and scream at each other, arguing over the points. And Jennifer, when it was time for her to go to bed, she would say, "Okay, boys, it's time for the green chairs." And we'd go to the far end of the house where we had these 2 green chairs and close the door so we could scream and yell without disturbing anybody. And then he would write, and we would go over it. And so that went on for a long time. It took a while to get that book written, but he kept coming up with new and interesting ideas. And then we had to work through all those ideas. And that was a long time ago.
Gosh, it's
and now we're still, in fact, I just came, I was late this morning for you, AJ, because we were playing basketball. And, he was supposed to be finishing up his new book, but instead he's been working on shot dynamics and learning and he showed me how to do this new shot. And we got a chance to go out there using this new way of shooting. It works fabulously well. And so I was saying I was going to forgive him for not having finished his newest book, because he really did figure out how the basketball shot works. And he showed me how to do it. And so now I can shoot much farther out, which is great.
Did he beat you this morning?
He did. We played yesterday too, because he came. We were warming up for this morning's game, and we had a shooting contest. And he beat me. He beat me.
Do you think if you hadn't met him 50 years ago, you'd have any friends today?
Well, I'd probably have a different friend, because meeting him, it kind of satiates that whole social interaction, that social interchange. So I'm not necessarily inclined to spend a lot of time, cultivating other friendships other than my wife, Dr. Morano. So, you only have so much time in the day. And so in the case of Doug Lyle, he's really like the sharpest person I've ever met. So he's always interesting. It's always, challenging. Plus, we happen to both like basketball. And so we spend a lot of time playing basketball and thinking about, how to do that better. Now, we're excited because I'm 62 now, so we're old enough that we can enter the senior basketball championship. So we're trying to put a team together of people 60 or over that will play in May in Florida. So if any of your listeners like to play basketball and you're over 60 years old, contact me, because we're trying to get a good a vegan team together.
Well, if I could play, I'm over 60, but I don't think I'm very good. But it would be fun to play with you guys for sure. So this question, boy, we get this asked a lot, and it's from Shauna. Is flax or chia seed necessary? And then I would add to that vegan DHA, because some of the doctors are saying we got to take it now. And Dr. Clapper said, no, we don't.
Well, what you do want to do is have a diet rich in whole plant food. So if, one thing that's rich in omega-3 fatty acids is green vegetables. So if you eat large volumes of green vegetables, you get a lot there. Some green vegetables have more than others, like purslane happens to be a little bit richer than other vegetables. But it is true, flax seeds or walnuts or chia seeds happen to be really rich in omega-3 fatty acids. So if you're having problems with dry skin, or you're concerned about increasing your omega-3 fatty acids, it would certainly make sense to include some ground flax seeds or chia seeds or walnuts, or other foods that happen to be very rich in those particular nutrients.
Great, thank you. So this is a question from Ganesha. Does Dr. Goldhamer personally get sugar cravings, and how does he deal with it?
No, what happens when people go, and I don't think this is unique to me, but once you get off the refined carbohydrates, your blood insulin levels begin to stabilize. And when you're on a really high mineral content, vegetable-rich diet, blood sugars are very stable. So a lot of this cravings people get is when their blood sugar levels go up, and then the insulin goes up and drives the sugar down. Your brain thinks you're starving, and you get cravings, and you want to binge, and you want to put the fire out on that discomfort. My blood sugar levels tend to be very stable, like most people on this diet. And so, it's not hard having to skip a meal. It's not hard. It's not a problem. There's no craving issues. There's no like, oh, I want to have a piece of chocolate cheesecake or coagulated cow pus or whatever it is that people, find themselves craving. It's much, much easier to do this diet when you're on this diet than it is to be on a conventional diet and try to change this type of eating. It gets easier and easier and easier until eventually it's preferential. It's not even discipline anymore.
That's the thing of people, and it's always feel like you do it right or you do it over. If people just listen to you, I have no struggles, no cravings. It's been over 10 years since I met you. I just did what you said. It was delicious. And I
remember the one time you were going to vary, I made you a phone call and it stopped you.
Yeah, that's right. I'll never forget that. It was the only time you ever called me.
Tiramisu.
You got me. Yep. That's great. Thank you.
You got to show your viewers that. That's such a great story. I love that one.
Okay. All right. Well, so it was for when we were producing those annual conferences in November, Healthy Taste of LA. And I went to this print shop on Ventura Boulevard near Woodman to get, because every speaker I would get like a funny apron or something, like if it was Dr. Esselstyn, it would say no oil or something like that. And right next door, there was a new bakery and it said vegan, paleo, you know, had everything on it. And so I went there to get Charles something because he can eat more liberally than I and not have a health or weight issues. And I got him, I don't know, some cupcake or something. And I brought it home and he said, oh, this is really good. I said, well, I have to go back tomorrow to pick up the print order. You want me to get you something? He goes, yeah, get me something. So I came back and I got him whatever it was. I don't know, lemon cupcake. I don't remember, but he doesn't eat chocolate. And, you know, it was vegan, obviously, and gluten-free. And he said, oh, you must have really liked it to come back this soon. And I'm like, no, I don't eat, you know, I said, everything, you know, I'm vegan. I don't eat gluten. I don't eat sugar. All the things. They go, well, we have something for you. And so they gave me some kind of date bar that was sweetened with, you know, it had all the specifications, but it was sweetened with dates and stevia, which, you know, you don't want to get into those artificial ones. And I figured, you know, what's one pastry gonna hurt, right? So I'm walking out to my car on Ventura Boulevard, which is a busy street, and my phone rings and it's you. And I literally dropped it in the street. So I knew it was a sign from heaven that I was not supposed to eat that. So I just don't even bother anymore because I don't want you calling me. Yeah, that was a great story. Thank you for reminding me. So she goes on to say, is there a phase where sugar cravings completely vanishes? And I think with compliance, it does.
Yeah, absolutely. Fasting speeds it up. You know, a lot of times post-fasting people find they're having less cravings, but even just healthy eating consistently. Now, the problem is, for some people, it's days or weeks, but some people it's months. And I think it depends on what your history is, what your physiology is, how long does it take to get to optimum weight? You know, as long as you're losing weight, your body is continuing to trigger you, saying, hey, you're losing strategic fat reserves, stop it. Your body doesn't want you to lose those fat reserves because it wants you to be ready when spring comes late, that you can survive. It doesn't want you being, you know, zero fat in your body. And as a consequence, if you want to get thin, you have to override that biology of stress during weight loss. Once you're stable, you should be fine. But while you're actively losing weight, there are definitely going to be biological triggers. Because, you know, again, your body's thinking you're hemorrhaging strategic fat reserves, not getting rid of excessive, you know, adipose. So, you know, get to optimum weight and you'll find the cravings tend to be less of an issue.
Great. And there's a question, why does Dr. Goldhamer hate dairy? This person is saying there's milk exclusive diets that have cured people from cancer and other life-threatening diseases.
In my experience, milk and milk products are the single most antagonistic food that people commonly eat. And I've seen more benefit at getting people off dairy products than any other single food. I wrote an article, it's called Nobody Needs Milk. And you can get it on our website. In fact, it's had 6.5 million downloads, which I believe is absolute guarantee that we'll never get funding from the American Dairy Council.
Here's a question from Esther. Can I go to True North just to enjoy the McDougall style food?
Yes, although you won't necessarily enjoy it exactly the same way you would the McDougall style food, because we're McDougall, but without the salt and without the sugar. So it's whole plant food, SOS free. So there is a little bit of an adjustment. If you're used to more of the salted vegan processed foods, this is another notch up. So there's a little bit of a transition that you're going to have to make, because getting rid of the salt, it takes people about a month on average to adapt to a low salt diet unless you fast, and then it happens more quickly.
Right, great. Here's a question from Noreen. It's another GERD question. Has had GERD since May 2021, can't sleep, breathe at night, doesn't want to take PPIs or H2 blockers, eats a low fat, no alkaline diet, 80% fruits and vegetables, always led a healthy lifestyle, not overweight, exercises daily. It's getting harder to exercise with this issue. Will diet heal the sphincter valve?
I don't know. I mean, it would certainly be worth first getting the diet fully tied in. If that's not enough, try to do fasting. And then there are some exogenous things that are done treatment-wise if necessary. Again, we've got doctors that have some experience. Dr. Sultana particularly works with a lot of people with chronic GI issues, as does Dr. Varas. So, you know, these are can be very challenging, you know, problems, particularly for people that are already eating healthy.
Great, thank you. Tammy says, have you seen any correlation between diet and chronic idiopathic urticaria?
Yes, in fact, we have I think we have a paper actually coming up And so a lot of these allergic type reactions that you see in the skin, various types of rashes and different issues, do respond to dietary change and certainly to fasting. And the really serious ones we oftentimes do sometimes significant effects. We also have a case we just published, or were just submitted for publication, I should say, on plaque psoriasis, which is interesting, where we have beautiful photos, before and after, and then on follow-up, showing how tremendously responsive this condition can be. And that's an autoimmune disease that has very serious implications.
Terrific. Thank you. Monique says, can fasting help reset oxalate sensitivity? I'm not even sure what that is.
Well, oxalates are found higher in some plants than others, like, oxalic acid richer in, say, spinach and other things like that. I think what they might be asking is, if you're sensitive to those foods, if you fast, would you not be sensitive to those foods? And the answer is probably not. You still probably have to limit your exposure to the types of foods. You may be less reactive, but I think you'd probably still be sensitive.
Wow, great. Thank you. All right. So Dana says that she has a 25% partial blockage in her Widowmaker. So she's been on a whole food plant-based SOS-free diet for 3 years following Dr. Esselstyn. She had invasive breast cancer 17 years ago in remission, but heard from Dr. Christine Funk that she should eat soy and tofu, that it's protective for not getting a recurrence. She's 65, sleep and memory not great. So she saw the Scher's eyes and said that soy and tofu and 2 tablespoons of olive oil a day is the best. If you want your brain breast to be healthy, what is a whole food plant-based eater to do?
Well, that's a very serious mistake. The addition of oil, olive oil, or any other oil in a patient of this would be, I think, contraindicated. Although I don't have a huge objection to including small amounts of, soy-based products or whatever if they want to do that. I think the bigger issue is adopting a whole plant food SOS-free diet. Probably consider the possibility of doing some fasting, reverse the conditions so they don't have to deal with it.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Lewis says, if I'm on warfarin, a blood thinner, can I water fast?
So we're actually the only place in the world I know that does do some water fasting with patients on warfarin. We have one doctor that has a lot of experience managing warfarin by using INRs during fasting, and that's Dr. Peter Sultana.
What's INRs? I'm sorry.
It's a test that's done to measure your blood, stickiness. And it's very important that it be monitored carefully, because if your blood gets too thin, you bleed out. If it's too thick, you can clot and stroke. And so keeping those tests in the proper range is really tricky, especially during fasting, because you need less and less Coumadin once you, which is the word for warfarin. You need less and less as you get into the fast, as the body corrects itself. So you can end up on too much or too little. I don't like fasting anybody on anticoagulant therapy, but in some cases you can't get them off the anticoagulant therapy safely and they need to fast badly enough. We have made some exceptions and done some fasting, but that would only be with Dr. Sultana. If you're interested in that, what I'd suggest you do is first go on to our website, healthpromoting.com, complete the registration forms, and then arrange for a phone conversation with Dr. Sultana, who can determine whether or not you're a good candidate, help guide you, or maybe help you make the changes you need to make so you can wean off the need for the anticoagulants. So then you're an even safer candidate for fasting.
Great. And I've been posting in the live chat the link to get these surfaces as well as in the show notes. Laura says, does Dr. Goldhamer recommend longer fasts to achieve health goals, or intermittent fasting for a span of time to reach a health goal? And how do you determine a good span of time to fast for an individual, specifically one with weight and autoimmune health goals?
Yeah, so we recommend both. We recommend everybody do intermittent fasting every day for 12 to 16 hours. We recommend that everybody do an appropriate amount of medically supervised fasting. Now, the way you tell in some conditions, like, with blood pressure or diabetes, you fast until the blood sugar and blood pressure are normal. With weight, you fast as close as you can to optimum weight. And with autoimmune disease, we want to fast until the biomarkers are normal and the pain and stuff is gone. Now, you can't always do that. Sometimes people have too much weight to fast in a single fast. We rarely will fast over 40 days. So that's, 40, 50 pounds about the most you can lose in that fast. So if you're 100 pounds overweight, you probably have to have a couple fasts. It's a lot easier to lose weight fasting and then stabilize with feeding than it is to do rapid weight loss with feeding. So you're going to lose 2 pounds a week if you're a female feeding, maybe 3 pounds as a male. But in fasting, you're going to lose a pound a day. So, if you're trying to do rapid weight loss, it's going to happen more quickly fasting than in feeding.
Is that pound a day fat? Because don't people gain some weight back after the fast, even if they're perfect eaters?
Yeah, they'll lose fat, and preferentially visceral fat. Like, sort of, for example, you might lose, let's say you do a fast for 2 weeks and you lose 20% of your fat, but you might lose 50% of your visceral fat, the fat that's actually associated with inflammation. And then you're going to lose maybe 4% of lean tissue, but you'll regain your lean tissue after refeeding, and you'll regain the water and the fiber, but you will not regain fat. You will continue to lose fat. And we've proven that with our DEXA scanner in a study that we've recently completed.
Great, thank you. Elawad, I think I pronounced the name correctly, says, will fasting help lower the synovial inflammation in my knee? I live in Canada and I can't travel to TrueNorth because I'm not vaccinated.
Okay, so as far as they're not letting you leave the country right now if you're not vaccinated, I believe that they're starting to soften those, and perhaps testing is an option now, I'm not sure. But in any case, if you wanted to do some fasting in Canada right now to deal with synovial inflammation, you could work with Dr. Justin Wise, who could work with you and your local doctor, and you might be able to get a bit of a fast organized that way. And yes, fasting can be helpful with some of these chronic inflammatory conditions. I assume you've already done physical therapy, you've strengthened the muscles across the knee, you're doing all that kind of stuff. Now, if we want to turn the heat up, in addition to the dietary change, fasting might be a consideration.
Great, thank you. Joy wanted to know what you think of the shingles vaccine for somebody that's actually already had shingles, I guess, to prevent a recurrence.
Well, normally shingles will not recur once a person's had shingles. Generally, I believe that's considered to have persistent immunity. And I'm not a big fan of the vaccinations in general, including the shingles. So it wouldn't be something that we would be administering.
Okay, thank you. And Bronwyn says, how effective is intermittent fasting for weight loss for women? I eat a whole food plant-based diet and was curious if I should also be doing intermittent fasting.
Yeah, not eating 3 to 4 hours before you go to bed seems to be a pretty good habit pattern that helps us maintain weight loss. The biggest thing is, of course, what does go in your mouth. If you only have an 8-hour feeding window, but you fill it with cheese and chocolate, you're probably not going to be successful. If what you're putting in your mouth during the feeding time is whole plant foods, fruits, vegetables, grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds, and you don't eat meat, fish, fowl, eggs, dairy products, oil, salt, and sugar, you should be losing 2 pounds a week if you're a female and 3 pounds a week if you're a male, or thereabouts.
Great. Well, I saved the most controversial question for last. What does Dr. Goldhamer think about the COVID vaccine?
Well, again, I'm very concerned about the fact that they're trying to mandate what is not yet a well-established medical treatment procedure. So whether it's a vaccine or anything else, I think it's a very dangerous precedent to be mandating something that I think is yet to be demonstrated in terms of its efficacy. We do know, though, that the people that are dying from COVID have some things in common. And obesity, diabetes, being sick, basically, is not a good thing when you get COVID. So one thing I think we should all be doing, vaccinated or not, is focusing on getting healthy, losing the weight, getting on a health promoting diet, building our immune system, our gut microbiome, et cetera, so that when we get exposed, whether it's COVID or any influenza or any other infectious agent, our body's immune system is prepared to overcome the problem and to survive. And that's true, again, whether you're vaccinated or you're not vaccinated, none of that changes. We also know that whether you're vaccinated or not, you can still get COVID and you can still spread COVID. As far as I understand, whatever level your vaccination status is, your capacity to harbor coronavirus and pass it on to other people is still there. That's why they're suggesting everybody needs to still practice social distancing and wear masks and all this kind of thing. As far as I understand, the big claim to fame for vaccination is that it may reduce the intensity of that in people that are so treated. And that may be true. I haven't seen enough data to form a conclusion on that. But the point is, whether that's true or not, that doesn't make you less capable of carrying that particular virus or passing it on, which means our focus ought to be on healthful living right now. How can we get healthier so that we're more resistant and resilient when we get exposed inevitably? Because this isn't the end of it. This isn't the last virus that we're going to breed because of our animal husbandry practices. And as long as we continue to raise animals the way we do, there's going to be viruses that are going to transfer to humans, and some of those are going to be nasty. Some may be more nasty than the ones we're dealing with today. So, I think the best insurance is health.
Right. Dr. Goldhamer, I know that you came up with the title for the pleasure trap, but did you also come up with the subtitle that says the hidden force that undermines health and happiness?
Well, I think we all worked on that, but yeah, I think that the titling, we worked on very early before the book was written. And as I said, once that major accomplishment was done, the details of the book itself, Dr. Lyle largely took care of that.
Because I was wondering, do you feel that people grossly underestimate the pleasure trap?
The pleasure trap is the hidden force that undermines health and happiness. It's why people are fat, sick, and miserable. It's basically the force that's tripping us up. And that's why if you haven't read The Pleasure Trap, you should. If you don't like to read, then you should listen to it, because AJ did a really fabulous job, thank you, AJ, of recording The Pleasure Trap in audio version. And for those of us that process information orally better than we do with written word, it's a great way to take it in. I also found it's a useful tool if you want to get somebody else to learn about the pleasure trap. Go on a car ride with them and take everything else out of the car, and then they have to listen to it. So, it's a really good way of getting it in.
Dr. Goldhamer, you, as always, you're so generous with your time. Thank you so much to the viewers who sent their questions in advance. That's how you get priority. Any closing thoughts? We have the link posted several times for the people that can't travel to the TrueNorth Health Center to work with your team of health experts.
Well, yeah, just remember, we do offer a free phone conversation with me. So if you have a question about if any of our doctors might be of help to you, or if this approach may be useful, feel free, go to our website, TrueNorthHealth.com, complete the registration forms, and then just give me a call. I'll be happy to talk to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Goldhamer.
Thank you, AJ.
Of course. And thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. Please come back tomorrow when my guest is Susan Benegas, and she founded or co-founded the Plantrition Conference. Take care, Dr. Goldhamer.